1994, Ronald Reagan gave what is now an immortal speech called A Time for Choosing. I think on this committee, we find ourselves similarly in a time for choosing. The senator from Connecticut is trying valiantly to rehabilitate this nominee. And the arguments he's presenting are essentially, well, she's not all that bright. She didn't really read the letter. She didn't really know what was in it. She signed it, but she didn't mean to sign it. And if she'd known what was in it, she wouldn't have signed it. Now, that's the defense of her. Remember, we're talking about whether this person is fit to be a federal judge. And if the best defense is she's too dumb to figure out what she signed and she didn't mean to sign it, didn't read it, and didn't know what it said, that doesn't give you a whole lot of comfort, the kind of job she'd do if she's wearing a black robe and signing death warrants. Maybe she ought to read the piece of paper in front of her. And by the way, this is not some writing from 30 years ago when she was in college. This was written March 16th, 2020, 3 years ago. It's recent. I don't believe it's an accident that she didn't turn it over. She knew damn well this is a radical document. And look, the notion that she did not understand what it meant. I'm holding it in my hand. Let me read you. I'm just going to read you from the very beginning, because let's see if it's subtle. Let's see if they hide the ball, what it talks about. Here are the opening words of the letter. The undersigned organizations and individuals call on Governor Lamont to act immediately to protect the lives of the incarcerated people in our state. 3 urgent steps are needed. 1, the immediate release of as many people in custody as possible. 2, a moratorium on new admissions into jails and prisons. And 3, evidence-based, humane, and rights-affirming measures to protect the health and well-being of the individuals who will stay behind walls. That's the opening paragraph. It ain't subtle. To my friend from Connecticut, if she's not bright enough to figure out this letter is saying, let the criminals go, when it says in the opening paragraph, we demand right now you let the criminals go, then she needs to go back to remedial English in 5th grade and not become a federal judge. By the way, the letter goes on and on and on. You go into the body of the letter. We call on Governor Lamont, the state of Connecticut, to 1, immediately release to the maximum extent possible people incarcerated pre-trial and post-conviction. On pretrial release, here's what it says. Governor Lamont should use his emergency powers to protect incarcerated people, their communities, and correctional staff by releasing all, A-L-L, all people who are incarcerated without having been convicted of a crime. I want you to stop and understand what those words mean. All people means everyone. It means every murderer in the state of Texas. If you have a serial killer who has raped and murdered a dozen women on the highways of Connecticut and he's arrested, what did this woman call for? Let him go. If it's pre-conviction, let the serial killer go. If you have an aggravated rapist, if you have a child molester, there's no conditionality about, well, only nonviolent. No, it doesn't say nonviolent. It says all. Let every single criminal go pre-conviction. Look, I understand this is Washington, D.C., and there's politics here. And there are a lot of issues on which Democrats vote with Democrats, Republicans vote with Republicans. We've all been here a long time. We understand that's how it works. But every person sitting at this dais was elected by the people of their states. And you were elected not to follow the instructions of Chuck Schumer, not to follow the instructions of Joe Biden. You were elected to represent the citizens of your own states. I've been to the states of every member of this committee. I promise you the citizens of your state would find this a simple question. I expect in a minute every Democrat, like the Soviet Politburo, is going to vote for this judge. Da! Because that's what happens. You're not going to refute the substance of what we said. You're just going to be, we're Democrats, we're voting yes. And part of the reason you are is you're very confident the media back home is not going to ask you about it. I would challenge the Democrat members of this committee. Go home and convene a town hall in your state. Ask the citizens of Illinois, should we confirm to the federal bench a woman who demanded that Connecticut release all violent criminals, all criminals pre-conviction, all murderers, all rapists, all child molesters? Should we make her a federal judge with the power to do that? Ask the citizens of Rhode Island. Ask the citizens of Minnesota. Ask the citizens of Delaware and Connecticut and Hawaii and New Jersey and California and Georgia and Vermont and California again. I guarantee you, I don't care how blue your state is. Your citizens, if you ask them, so what do you think? Someone who thinks we should empty the jails and release violent criminals, should they be a federal judge? Great state of Georgia, the Peach State. I don't think you could find a room of people who would say, yeah, that should be a federal judge. Just about anybody. You can get a bunch of lefty college kids. Ask them, should that be a federal judge? They'd say, of course not. Constitution gives this body the power of advice and consent. But it only works if people have the backbone to use it. If you view your job as I'm a rubber stamp for the Biden White House, whoever they send us, look, the Democrats on this committee have already signed off on 3 nominees of the Department of Justice who want to abolish the police. You've already signed off on a radical judge who describes himself in his own words as a, quote, wild-eyed liberal, says he wakes up every morning motivated by hatred for conservatives. He's a federal judge in New York. God help you if you're a conservative and you're in his court. You go sit there, Your Honor, you realize Your Honor woke up that morning motivated by hatred of you. But every Democrat thought that was fine. That looks like a good judge to us. And you're preparing to move forward on a judge that literally doesn't know what Article 2 of the Constitution is. We've also got another judge whose most significant legal experience was a driver's license revocation proceeding. You all know this is garbage. You know the right thing to do. What it takes is one Democrat to have the gumption to say no. And by the way, all right, y'all are familiar with the little bracelets people wear, WWJD, what would Jesus do? I'm going to suggest to the Democrats you have a version of that. And with respect to the good Lord, I'm not going to invoke his name. I'm going to make a more terrestrial version. I'm going to suggest that you guys wear a bracelet that says WWJKD. That when you're thinking of what to do, ask yourself, what would John Kennedy do? That's a really good test. What would John Kennedy do? And by the way, if these were Trump judges, heck, I'd be here with popcorn watching John Kennedy rip those Trump judges a new one. If they send a judge that doesn't know what Article 2 is, that person's not becoming a judge. Because John Kennedy actually respects what it means to be a judge. He spent too much time in too many courtrooms to know if you have a jackass who doesn't know what he's doing or an ideologue on the bench, it's bad for the rule of law. And y'all remember, John Kennedy torpedoed Trump judge after Trump judge. We had a lot of great judges, but we had some that weren't great. And the ones that weren't great, the Republicans on this committee said, no, go back and do it again. Is there even a single Democrat who could look at that bracelet, what would John Kennedy do, and say, you know what? A judge who calls for releasing every violent criminal in the state of Connecticut who's on pretrial containment, that shouldn't be a judge. You all know it. The choice you're facing is, well, if I vote no, wow, the White House is going to be really mad. If I vote no, Chuck Schumer is going to be really mad. You know, I'm supposed to follow the instructions of my party. You're United States senators, for Pete's sakes. You don't represent the White House. You don't represent Chuck Schumer. You represent the people in your state. And all of you, the people in your state on this nominee, would look to you and say, if they read this letter, the people in your state would say, when you are voting, you should not just vote no, you should vote hell no. And I hope and pray maybe one of you chooses to listen to the people in your state, or if not, can look forward to when you're back in your state, having constituents read this letter to you and say, why did you think this person should be a judge? I got to tell you, I wouldn't know how to answer that question. Only answer I'd know to give to my constituents is, of course I didn't. She'd make a terrible judge. So do what you know is right.